Thomas Green here with Ethical Marketing Service. On the podcast today, we have Jamie Brownlee. Jamie, welcome.
Welcome. Thank you very much, Thomas. Thank you.
Would you like to take a moment and tell the audience a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am a director at Greentarget, and we are a specialist B2B financial services agency. I have been in PR and communications for around 12 years. I have kind of represented a complete and utter range of clients, from small, medium to very, very big, in a variety of different segments within financial services. I've also done quite a bit of PR in kind of the consumer angle area as well, and also some kind of more, I guess some more varied companies in different segments. My job on a kind of a day-to-day basis is very much to kind of raise the profile of my clients and of their brand, but also at the same time trying to protect their reputation and their brand when things happen, and they often they can be some quite poor sort of publicity on the back of it. So it's a case of raising the profile of brands and protecting them.
Okay, thanks for that. Well, we had a good conversation before this one to, let's say, preempt what we were going to discuss today. And typically what I do is I say, here's what I'm going to discuss, and are you happy with the proposed topic? But rather than me saying it, why don't you put it in your words so that it's, I don't know, more formed?
Sure. I mean, it's about the idea of ethical, I guess, investing, or ethical, the ethical process and the way that companies are trying to adjust the way they're operating going forward. And I think one thing that I've noticed from my clients is that the big buzzword for a lot of my clients who are in kind of maybe the wealth management, investment management area is on ESG, and that big push to be ethical in the way you operate. And that can be from the way that you are ethical in the way that you yourself as a company operate, or it can be in the type of products you offer and the way that you are essentially selling the products that you have yourself. And we've seen a huge rise in this, and this huge rise of companies that are keen to get involved in this and keen to take advantage of the opportunities that are out there. And that can be from a perspective which is from clients who are pushing perhaps a younger, more millennial audience that are pushing for these type of products, or those type of people that are actually working for these companies and demand more of an ethical approach in the way that these companies work on a day-to-day basis. So one thing I've seen is a lot of this. Now, I think some companies have done this very, very well. They are very much taking this on board. They're almost trying to implement it into the DNA of the company. And that then subsequently has a sort of knock-on effect in the type of products they're offering and the type of audiences they're going after. And they're understanding that actually, if they do adjust the way that they operate and the products that they produce and the service that they offer, that actually they are becoming more and more appealing to a younger, more diverse audience. And I think they're seeing the benefits of that. One thing that I've seen, and I think companies need to be better at, is just being a bit, more simple in the way that or simplifying the way that they are communicating this process and what they're looking to do, providing proof points where possible. Now, if they are perhaps not able to be as ethical as they would like at this present time, then that is not necessarily a bad thing. They will get there if they have that in place. But I think what we don't want is companies going out and saying we're ethical, we're providing ethical service and providing ethical products, or we're looking to. But actually, that's just hearsay. It's talk. It's hot air. You haven't got the proof points, the credibility to prove that. And I think that actually can often get clients can actually end up with egg on their face there. And I think it's important that if you are wanting to be part of that process of adjusting the way you're operating to suit the wider demand, then you've got to absolutely have those proof points and that sort of that element of showing how you're doing it with data, with numbers, essentially proof points. And that's really, really important.
Okay. The example you gave in our talk was, I think, like perhaps the older generation are making a buying decision, and the younger generation is asking about the ethics of that particular company. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And that happens a lot in more recently in the wealth management industry, for example, or the financial planning industry. So, for example, we're seeing a lot, in previous years, a lot of these wealth management firms and financial planning firms, for example, would be dealing with somebody who is probably 50 plus, male, and that would be the decision maker, so to speak. Now, families obviously have evolved so much now that it's a very much often a co-decision with the mother and the father, the husband and the wife. But what we're also seeing is, as I say, children, younger children coming through and being part of that process, whether that be actually having more of an interest in the investment management decision, or how that their money or their inheritance is going to be managed and invested, and demanding that the company that they're dealing with, not only the wealth manager is themselves an ethical company in the way they operate, but also the products that they're investing to maximize and to generate that wealth going forward is done on an ethical basis. And we're seeing that a lot is happening. That's happening an awful lot. So a lot of wealth managers are actually adjusting the way. And I think more importantly, what wealth managers are starting to see, for example, is that not only are ethical products in high demand, but actually the performance of these ethical products is actually very, very good. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a case of actually saying, we're investing in ethical products, or we're investing in an ethical manner because we're feeling the pressure from clients. Actually, what they're starting to see is, the performance of these products is actually been fantastic as well. So it almost becomes a given, an obvious decision for them. So the pressure that a lot of these companies and these wealth managers are facing is one that is changing their approach, but for the better ultimately.
Mm. Can you give me a quick meaning of ESG, because I hadn't heard that term before I spoke to you?
Yeah, so ESG is ethical, social, and corporate governance. So the idea that there are certain factors that when you are investing, for example, in ESG or via ESG, that you have to adhere to in order to make sure. And usually it's the obvious. So it's no alcohol, tobacco, firearms, pornography. It's essentially trying to make sure you are investing in products that do tick certain boxes. The issue that a lot of these firms have, and it's difficult. It's very much a difficult challenge. Is that it's very difficult sometimes to, if you, for example, invest in a fund, or you invest in stock, or you invest in a certain type of asset class, to actually look back and to sort of forensically look back at where each individual part has come from. It can be that there would be some element of crossover, whether it be oil or palm tree, or there are certain elements that there could be some blurring of the line. So I do think from a client perspective, I think certain perhaps investees or clients of these firms, I think they have to understand that, yes, it's very important to have a very, if you are wanting to invest very ethically, then absolutely to stick to the ESG logic, but also understand that there sometimes there is almost no way of being completely ethical in the way. There will always be some elements where there might be a bit of blurring. So understanding that it can be sometimes that certain firms cannot escape completely, being completely green and ethical in what they're investing in. And we've seen that a lot. For example, the media will often look into this and see that certain companies perhaps aren't quite as ethical or as green as they thought they were. Now, I don't think that's necessarily a problem. I just think that what that comes down to is companies need to have the right messaging, which is we will do everything in our power to make sure that what we are providing, what we are looking to provide, is ethical. However, that sometimes it is almost impossible not to check every single layer of how that product has come to be.
So in the example that you're referring to, the finance one, would that be, like you say, an investment where like a trust, for example, where an adult is not an adult, and like I say, the older generation is putting it into an investment, and the younger generation is going to inherit that at some point, and the decision is being made by all of the parties. Is that accurate? And also, can you give me a non-finance example for, I don't know, just for the sake of conversation?
Yeah, and I think from from that perspective, from what we're meaning there is, so for example, if you are a client of a wealth manager or a bank, or and you have a portfolio, your own individual portfolio, you will invest in a variety of different products, funds, stocks, bonds, currency, you name it. It will be very, and it should be varied, because ultimately you want that level of diversification when you invest. What we're finding is potentially younger clients younger people whose parents are clients of the firms that we mentioned, or the sector we mentioned. They are being brought into the conversation. They're being perhaps told what level or the sort of the allocation that their parents might have, and are saying, well, okay, but how ethical are those products, or how ethical are those individual funds? So they are themselves,
I mean, like a referral.
Yeah, well, more just that they're seeing those, they're being presented those as part of a family consultation, and saying, actually, mum, dad, I'm not really happy actually that I don't think we as a family, or the money that's being passed on via inheritance, I don't feel that's actually very ethical. I'm not really comfortable with that. Now, that I mentioned that's the children doing that. It might not be. It actually can be. We've often seen that certain older clients have perhaps have seen, they've seen a documentary, one of the Netflix documentaries, and they said, you know what, I'm really not comfortable with investing in anything that has this has any allocation, or have any contact with this type of sector or this type of company. I just don't want that at all. So there's a bit of both. There's a younger generation which I think born into being more ethical naturally, and there's an older generation that are perhaps being forced by the young generation, but also by general public demand for being more ethical in the way we operate. And they are sort of running that conversation, I would say. And something that's not financial related, very simply, is if you look at the way we shop, our shopping habits. I think people are, they are seeing constant, whether it be they are themselves seeing in the financial services industry the pressure being put on companies to adopt a more ethical approach, or whether they're seeing documentaries, or whether they are seeing, certain problems with extinction, problems with climate change. They are themselves changing the way that they operate, in the way that they, you just have to look around at the alternatives now. For example, milk, the alternatives in the milk sector now, and that's people just changing the way they are eating and drinking and consuming in life. And that's from pressures, from a variety of pressures. And I think it seems to me that once something starts, when it comes to ethical, whether it be in the way we consume, whether we spend, whatever it may be, it often has a real snowball effect. I don't think it's ever a flash in the pan. I think even me myself, if I take, I would never have now milk with a coffee. I'll always have oat milk, and that's at the start. I thought, well, yeah, why not? I mean, less dairy it's good for the planet. It's perhaps better for me. And now I would never go back. And I think that often happens in a number of sectors. It's not just in our tastes. It's once you've started the process, you like what you're doing. I think it's very fast. And you just have to look at just general, the amount of people that have become vegan, the amount of people that are vegetarian. It's a natural thing, I think, that is spreading, and it's spreading incredibly quickly, because it's not just individuals now that are leading this. This is generations. This is the early generation before us that are pushing this through.
Well, separate from the ethics themselves, I wanted to talk to you mainly about because this is typically a business podcast. And the reason I really wanted to get your take on it was because this is an area which I think businesses really struggle with and often can get very wrong. And so what are your thoughts on, I want to ask you about lots of different things. So what are the examples that they've got it really wrong, that spring to mind for you?
Yeah, and I have to say this is quite common. We see this quite a bit. So if, for example, we take the gender, or the diversity in general of companies, so how diverse they are they, particularly in my area of financial services, which is predominantly white male. If you look at this sector, there have been in the last few years a number of companies that have very much banged the drum about being more diverse as a company, bringing more women through, bringing more BAME people through, bringing a greater diversity of people coming through their company. And they've gone out with this message about it, and they've pushed this idea. And this happens, I've seen this in a number of companies. And actually, a journalist, a good journalist, has done their job, and they've actually gone through the numbers, and they've seen, in the last 10 years, there's been no change at all, barely any change at all. For example, another example is is a number of companies saying, yeah, more women should be on the boards of FTSE 100 companies, or listed companies. More women should be on the boards. And then, then again, the research is done, because obviously a lot of information on boards is publicly available. It hasn't, the numbers haven't changed at all. So this is something that we continue to see, and it's back to my earlier point, is clearly things need to change, and the way that we operate has to be more ethical. It's better for everyone. And as I said before, often with products that are more ethical, the performance can be just as good. And I think companies need to absolutely inform, and to be very much keen to be bold about this, but only if they themselves are actually endorsing that and actually doing it themselves, because I think that the reputational damage that you can do by wanting to be part of the dialogue and wanting to push forward and say how the sector needs to improve and how this needs to happen, and this, and you yourself as a company haven't changed in the last 5-10 years. It doesn't look good. It really doesn't. So I think that one thing I would say to businesses is, if you are changing the way that you operate, and you are you are actually doing that rather than talking about it, then absolutely go on the front foot and be part of that dialogue, because I think it's really important that you associate your brand with that dialogue to do all the things I've mentioned before. But if you're not doing this, but you still want to be part of the dialogue, or you think you should be part of the dialogue, be very, very careful, because it can be a very slippery slope there for going forward.
Mm. And what the alternative to that would be? What's the best examples that you've seen of a company doing it well?
Oh, well, we've seen a number of companies who have increased their gender diversity, for example, or have increased their BAME diversity in their company, and whether that be from graduate programs. I think that is actually one thing I think I've seen a lot of is a lot of companies who are enforcing really good quality graduate programs, and they're not just, like in the past, graduate programs that are only essentially catered to a certain amount of universities. They're actually saying, you know what, we're actually going to open this up across the different backgrounds of people to make sure we get the best quality people. And they are. And I think what that is doing, and you can already see that, is it's having a direct impact on the way that the company operates. And it's coming up with, the company itself is coming up with new initiatives and new philanthropic ideas that they perhaps wouldn't have done before, because the people they're bringing in understand or have had experience of what it's like to have not, gone through the traditional financial services upbringing that a lot of people have. And I think you're starting to see that, certainly with the charities that are being supported, and the way and the different areas that these companies are supporting in what they're doing from a charitable perspective. But the other thing that we're seeing as well is a lot of companies now trying to, I think in the past, a lot of companies would see the charitable idea of, or the philanthropic push as just providing money, and that would be it. So giving the money, associating yourself with the brand, that's it. What we're now seeing is companies are actively taking a role in not only providing the necessary capital, but being part of that organization by perhaps even having a person on within that brand to join the board of that organization, but actually then themselves, whether it be on a regular basis, sending their team members out to go and be part of that, whether it be building a school or providing food, or it could be anything like that. Having a sports event that generates cash, a fundraiser, and we're seeing that a lot more companies are doing that, and doing that really, really well. And whether it be in certain parts of the country that in previously they may not have gone to, it might be areas of the UK or wider that in the past they wouldn't have even considered. And that's having a really important impact on the local areas, bringing through or providing necessary capital that then brings through the next generation in that area that perhaps in previous years wouldn't have had a chance. So I think it's having a really good knock-on effect where possible. And I think the more that these companies can appeal to a wider base of people to not only, associate their brand with what they're doing, but also actually getting these people into the company, bringing them through, training them. And you're already starting to see in the type of initiatives that they are pursuing are very different to what they did before.
It's interesting that you come to that last point, because my next question was going to be about, at least prior to the popularity of doing this practice, highlighting ethics, I was always of the position that if you're advertising or communicating, you should be highlighting your product's benefits. You should be promoting what your company does rather than, let's say a cause. So my question was kind of around the topic of, do you think, because part of me thinks, like, if it's a charity, for example, they're pushing a cause for what I perceive to be good reasons. Whereas if it's a business and they're, let's say, using their massive advertising budget to promote, like you say, ESG, for example, my thinking on it is, are they doing it for the cause itself, or are they doing it because there's going to be some financial gain in it? Have you got any thoughts around that topic?
That's a great question. I think it's a tricky one. I think it's probably a bit of both, and I think because it's a bit of both, there is probably not only more focus on it, but actually potentially more capital. So while it might not necessarily be for the main objective, which is for a better world, I think it certainly is. There's certainly that element. I mean, I think companies that are actively pursuing that are certainly doing it because they feel the pressure from clients, so client demand, and clients expect it now. But I also think there is pressure on people to make a change, whether it be on their own personal lives. But if you are part of a company, you want more. You want your leaders in your company to. We saw some research recently that was very much talking about how CEOs need to take. Employees want to see their CEOs and their senior management actually being bold and taking responsibility. And I think that's really, really, really important. I think it's really important that, as you say, CEOs show that they care and they want to change and aren't robotic, because in the past, perhaps as PRs, we would try and train the senior management people to talk in a way that is on messaging. And that's important from what I do. But I think it's just as important to make sure the personality comes across. Show that the person, if you are a CEO, that you do care about the environment, you do care about the wider world and injustice, and making sure that you work in a diverse company, and making sure that that these firms are doing their bit. But I also think what hasn't perhaps happened until more recently is this demand coming through from a younger generation, from more pressures from the outside world, which is impacting on clients, which clients are then demanding from the companies that they work with. So I think in the past, yes, it probably was a bit of people feeling like it was a bit of a tick box exercise, had to show that you were doing it. That was important because everyone else was doing it. And yes, okay, yeah, we do we do care about the world, or certain people did care about the world, but ultimately it was probably more of a tick box exercise. Now I think things have changed a lot. There's so much pressure from all sides, and I think generally people do care a bit more because the information's out there. Go back to the earlier points. I think in the past, again, you probably didn't know certain things about what was happening and the speed of climate change, or the damage that you were doing by your own individual lifestyle at times. I think the information is out there. There's content galore on sort of the ethics of life, and I think there's also a number of documentaries which have come through as well, which is again just provided that information. So I think that's the big difference, is the information and the education is out there. More needs to be done, but it is out there, and that is creating a knock-on effect, which is a good thing.
So I think at least the theme, my perception is that the theme is differentiating the companies that are actually doing it versus saying that they care about it. So how, as a consumer, do you differentiate between those two?
In terms of if you are looking to work or to buy a product from that company, yeah, I mean that again is very, very difficult, because you need to have a lot of information about that company. So I think if you are, I think and companies will do that. I think that's something, whether it be if you are a consumer, for example, it's probably a little bit harder to get access to that information about the company in terms of what they do. But I think you should absolutely do your due diligence as much as you possibly can to get that information. And I'm sure that there'll be a real rise in the number of companies, maybe comparative companies, that will be able to do that for you. So if you're looking to, say, buy a fund, you can now go on to a lot of aggregator sites, which will then say, here's a list of funds and the providers, and this is how ethical they are as well. So that is actually available there. But if it's in case of buying certain products for your own lifestyle, can be a bit more difficult, because you're ultimately reading marketing material, which obviously isn't always absolutely accurate. But I think it's important to try and do as much due diligence as possible. On the business side, so if you're a business, say you're a business buying a business, or a business that is looking to work with another business to provide a product or service, what we're also seeing is the level of due diligence is not now only just looking at the books. It's now looking at how ethical is that company, and that's become a really big thing. So companies are, for example, a company that's looking to buy another company, they're not just going to look at performance and potential performance and how many people they employ and what geographies and regions and areas they're looking to expand into. They will also look at how ethical is that company and how ethical do they approach things. And I think that again is a real positive, because then what you're having is you're having more and more ethically run companies being bought by bigger companies, and then obviously being grown much faster. So that's only a good thing. So yeah, I think I would say due diligence is really, really important. A little bit harder if you're a consumer, but try and do as much as you can. And if you're a business, that's already happening, and happening to a very high forensic level for sure.
Have you got any thoughts on the fact that often it's the case that small or medium-sized businesses will model what larger businesses do, and perhaps they don't have as many funds to promote themselves, and whether or not they should be, for lack of a better term, banging this drum as much as they can do, or whether or not they should be focusing on what I mentioned previously, which was about their services and promoting that?
Yeah, it's again really interesting point. I think on that, what we have found is, if you are, if we again take financial services and say you've got a big company that's producing a number of different products, and then you've got a smaller company that either is emerging or has just started, and trying to say, well, where do we sit? What we find is a lot of the smaller firms coming through understand that they can't compete against the bigger boys, but they don't see that as a negative at all. You just have to look at the theory, or the idea of disruption, and some of these companies that have completely disrupted the market. The Deliveroo's, the Ubers, they've completely disrupted a market that's been around for a number of years, and that's by being different. And I think if you are, we've certainly seen a lot of smaller firms emerging in financial services that have taken aspects of what clients want. And so at the moment, let's just say clients really, what they want obviously is performance, and they want something that's ethical, that's something that they would be proud to be associated with. And they've taken that, and that they focused on those two elements. So you've seen a number of, in the investment world, for example, or in the wealth management world, you've seen a number of companies emerge that they have sold themselves as an ethical investor. And they may only have 2 or 3 products, but those products, they have looked at those 2 products or 3 products incredibly closely to make sure they are fully ethical. They have more control over that as well, because again, with a bigger firm, it's much harder to keep all the funds. It can be a little bit more difficult with a number of funds to then look at exactly how ethical each one is. So I think what we're finding out, I don't think necessarily a lot of the smaller firms are going, we want to be like them. I think they're going, okay, we like that, and we understand what our clients want. So we're going to actually do it. We're going to do it our way. And I think also when it comes to financial services, and this isn't just financial services, but I think people are not, if you're say looking to buy a product for the first time, I don't think necessarily people go, I'm going to go for the biggest one. What's the biggest company? I'm going to go to them first. I think people are now doing their research, and I think people are going, okay, I really like that company, and I actually don't really care how big they are. I just like the way they are. I like what they promote. I like they operate. Financial services, I guess, the argument is it is different, obviously, because you're dealing with something that is, often huge sums of wealth, very, very the most important thing to most people's lives. So there will be an element of making sure you go with a bigger firm for the credibility factor and the security element. But I also think people are also diversifying the way they operate. So they might have some capital with a bigger, more traditional firm. But they might say, you know what, I want to invest another bit with a smaller firm that is all it focuses on is being an ethical investor. I quite like that. So I think we're certainly seeing a lot of companies that are saying, no, not going to do it like the big guys. We're going to actually do it we're going to do it like ourselves. And we this is why we think this is going to work.
Yeah, I can see how maybe not having that I don't know, massive compliance department, you might be able to move quicker, and perhaps also the type of messaging you may not need as much approval on, that kind of thing. It does make me think about something which you kind of mentioned previously, which was, do you think there's any risk involved in promoting this message of ethics when, and I'll give you an example. It makes me think of, believe it or not, avocados. So there was you've mentioned maybe a push behind plant-based eating. And then the other side of an argument might be that, they consume lots of avocados. There's a lot of bad money behind avocados, for lack of a better term. And so if you tie yourself to an ethical issue, and it actually turns out that ethical issue tends to be more complex than people thought it was, then if you've got your whole business and your positioning based around that issue, is there a risk around that? Your thoughts?
Oh, I mean, yeah, I think you've absolutely hit the nail on the head with that, because and that again is something that we're seeing. You're right, because you associate yourself with something that you previously thought was unbelievably ethical, couldn't, bulletproof, no problem at all. And then, as you say, you figure out actually the way that these things are planted, the way that these things are curated, the way that these things are, sold, the way that these are dug out the ground is unethical. It becomes very, very difficult to backtrack that. As you say, if you're let's say you're a startup and you have based yourself around investing in a certain asset or class or a product, and then suddenly, as you say, you've seen that this product is actually getting some really bad negative heat, because actually it's been discovered the way that this is actually done is not at all ethical, or that it has links. Often it has links to other companies that don't operate necessarily so ethically.
Like cartels.
So that then becomes, it can exactly. It can be anything, and it can get really, really difficult then, because you develop this business based on that, and what's a client going to say? Say, well, hold on a minute, you told me to do this, and I think that can be really difficult. And I think that's where that messaging is really, really difficult for companies, because it goes back to my point about, I don't think you can always say that you are going to be 100% ethical. I think that's really, really difficult, because there's always that chance that something like that will happen. I think as long as you communicate the fact that, to the best of our knowledge, what we are trying to do, we are trying to be as ethical as possible. And I think people will buy into that. I think people will understand that things change. There are connections. There are chains, value chains. There are, it can happen. That there are certain bits that come into that process which might not be as ethical as previously thought. But as long as that they know that the person who's investing their money, or the company that's investing their money, is doing everything they can to be as ethical as possible, I think that in itself is really, really important. And this isn't just financial services. This is across the board. As you say, you mentioned avocados, and this can be. I have no doubt one of the big, again, I take this back, I take this example again, but let's say oat milk suddenly discovered that oat milk is in no way ethical at all, or has a problem in how it's created. Again, what happens then? They Oatly, for example, the big company's just listed. So what on earth happens there? You've got a company that's available to the public to invest in, and suddenly that's not ethical. So I think it's a really difficult one to answer. But I think the most important thing, if you are a company, is that your messaging, firstly, are how ethical. It's important to do a proper deep dive in your own company, open the bonnet, and really look into it. Are you as ethical as you want to say you are? And if you are, then brilliant, absolutely. But the communication needs to be in a way that says, as we're trying to be as ethical as we possibly can, but things change. But if you're not ethical as ethical as you thought you are, then frankly, I think stay out of the dialogue until you are, because it's just, you're just going to look a bit silly.
I think you correct me if I'm wrong. I think you're positioning it as intent. So as long as you have good intent and you're open about saying that we'll correct things if we're not, if we get it wrong, then that's all people expect.
I think that would be fair to say, if you are an investor and you wanted to adjust the way that you invest, for example, or that you have pressures from your children to invest ethically, the main aim is, as you say, intent. I want to try and do this to the best of my ability and to the best of the best ability I possibly can. But as you say, things will change. If there are problems, if things do change, we will adjust accordingly. I think that I don't think anyone can expect more, frankly.
So let's say you're a smaller business and you're interested in, let's say, promoting in this way. What are the first few steps that you'd advise someone to do?
Well, the first thing you must do, regardless of size of business, I think, is to do a deep dive. Open the bonnet, have a look inside. What have you got there in terms of all the things that we've mentioned across ESG, bandwidth, but also gender diversity. Looking at your company in terms of the staff that you have. Looking in terms of the way that you operate. Looking, how do you recycle? What do you do about the way that you order? What about the use of paper? Just little things across the business that you might do on a day-to-day basis, and just having a look. Now, it might be that you then realize there are quite a few elements that you are not particularly good at and not particularly ethical in the way that you're operating, and I think that's a good thing that you've spotted that. So take the next step is then so you found what you've got a list, you've worked out what areas you are ethical in, what you've done well, and what things you are doing well. Then also you'll reveal things that you're not doing well. And I think the second step is then to go through that and go, right, okay, so where can we improve? Okay, we can improve in these areas. And again, mapping that out and how you're going to do that, how you're going to change. For example, bringing more people in from more diverse people into a business is not something you can just click your fingers and go. You've got to really think about how you're going to do that and how you're going to do that in a fair way again, because I think that's really important to make sure that you're bringing the right people in, but it's done in a fair process as well. So do you then have to get the right recruiters involved? Do you have to then perhaps go to different universities? Do you have to speak to a company that maybe does that? So and seeking outside help in terms of this. There are a lot of companies who do this and do this very, very well. And I think it's important that, where you need help, you should certainly advise it. And I think then the next step is then to go, right, how based on what you've discovered, if you've discovered, actually, we do operate in a really ethical manner, then absolutely be bold about it. I think it's really important. It's a really, really great way of promoting your brand. We often say to clients, look, if we're operating in an ethical manner, and the performance is good, which often it seems to be, there's a great connection between the people that operate most ethically or provide the most ethical products, often are having fantastic performance. That's a great story. That's a really, really great story for clients. And I think, particularly if you're doing it well, it's to get on the front foot as quickly as you possibly can. And to maintain it as well, because as we said before, what you don't want to happen is you to go on a big push and talk about how great and ethical you are, And then down the line, you are going to get caught out, because don't forget, once you put your name out there, journalists will be following you and they'll be tracking you, and they'll wanting to see results continue to improve or maintain at least and improve. So that's the other thing, is before you are going to be bold and you've done your deep dive, ask yourself the question: do we want to do this? Do we want to be part of this dialogue of talking about ethics, because we know it's really important? And are we confident that we can maintain this going forward? Because once you're out in the open, it's very, very difficult to then sort of hide.
Well, I'm going to put you on the spot here a little bit. That's okay. You mentioned about a deep dive under the bonnet. So I think that's a good idea. Self-knowledge, right? Let's have a look at the business. Are we talking about the kind of ethics which people are currently aware of? Let's say the trendy stuff right now to be ethical about, or are we talking about all ethics? So an example of that is that you mentioned the term BAME. So and the example I'll give you is that is very big at the moment. But like if you compare it to, let's say, people with disabilities, for example, not many people talking about the hiring of people with disabilities and promoting them, this sort of thing. So I can imagine it if you think about all the potential scenarios, ethics, and how you have to think about these things. I can imagine that being a very time-consuming topic. So are you advocating doing what's currently in the trends ethics wise, or are you advocating looking at it from a diverse, very in-depth ethical analysis?
I think it's, again, it will probably, obviously often that will come down to the size of the company. I think the bigger firms can afford to put people to those tasks, and should I say, they already do have those people that will be doing that on a very regular basis, who will be monitoring the situation of their own company and how diverse they are and how they operate as a firm, and just in their day-to-day running of the business, but also in the way that their products, services, etc., how they and because obviously they have the live data on clients, so they can do the same thing on their own, and they will be doing that. Smaller firms, it is a little bit harder, but I would urge smaller clients to try and do it as forensically as they can as well. I think it's, but the other thing, the other thing when you mentioned about the two different types, I actually think what that comes down to as well is who you're hiring. So again, it's that snowball effect, or that kind of that wave effect, where if you are hiring people, more diverse employees, they will themselves, if they are part of that conversation, will probably spot things when it comes to diversity, or when it comes to even, again, it could be even if you're employing younger people as well, they will spot things that maybe another generation wouldn't, in terms of being ethical. So it's to almost start this process, to make sure this process has an evolution and keeps improving as a process. It's important that you have the right people, part of your company, who can lead on that. And that actually comes down to being ethical and who you're and being, being as diverse in the way that you're recruiting. So it starts right from the beginning. And I think to have that longevity, but I would urge, if you're small, appreciate time and money is often tight. But if you can do that, and you can start a process by monitoring how ethical you are. That process can be reviewed on a regular basis, and you can keep track of how you are. And I think the other thing as well is how important it will be, and how incredibly impressive it would be for, say, on a regular basis, for senior management to be updating staff on how ethical the firm is being. I think that would be so strong. If I'm an employee and I'm being updated on how ethical my company is being, I think that would be unbelievably impressive. And that doesn't have to be externalized. That could be very much an internal process. But I think that would be really, really impressive. So I think from a communication perspective, people want that, and this is not going away. This is not something that's going to, in a few years, going to die down. I think that being more ethical and in all aspects of business is only going to increase in importance.
So smart answer. It depends, right?
Yeah, I tried.
Well, you highlighted something which might be the case that, if you also focus on some other area that's also ethical, which people aren't talking about, that might be an edge for you, perhaps.
Absolutely, exactly right. And I think, and that again comes down to who you're employing, because if you're employing younger, more diverse staff, they will spot things that other people won't. If you keep hiring the same people, you'll keep getting the same answers. You'll keep getting the same strategies and the same objectives in place. And some companies will want that because they're enormous companies that are generating huge profits every year. But in the long term, I don't think that's sustainable, because I think down the line, I think being ethical won't just be a requirement or be a demand. I think it will just be the norm. You have to operate like that. If you don't, people will just simply go, I don't want to work with them. And I think that is certainly happening. And you can already see government, for example, when it comes to take electric cars, for example, and cars in general. The government's already put the 2030 date in place. And I don't think 5 years ago, if you said that to me, I would have said they'd never do that. Not a chance. But they've done that. And I think there'll be more things like that, particularly when it comes to climate change, that will be put in place. And I think that shows the intention of the wider public or the wider world to make significant deadlines on things to get things sorted. And I think that in itself should be an indication of the future for sure.
Interesting. Jamie, what are your goals?
Well, I mean, I think from my perspective, it's when we're talking about being, ethics, it's trying to get across what I was saying about to my clients. I think to make sure that, they operate as ethically as they can, but don't jump the gun. I don't want my clients going out saying how ethical they're being, and actually they're not. It doesn't look good for them. It doesn't look good for me. And I don't want to have to deal with that sort of storm, because it's very, very difficult to argue that. If data comes back showing that they're not being as ethical as they want, there's not really much I can do there. So I think trying to create a far more ethical world, but doing it in a way that you are doing it in a process which means that you are, as a company, doing it yourself, adjusting the way you're operating before you start talking about it, before you start saying how important it is. That would be my goal.
Okay. Have you got anything that you'd like to share which I haven't asked you about today?
I think one thing I would say is just how important the next generation are going to be to changing everything that we do. And I know people will say, well, this is just a generation, every generation does this. But I think what we're seeing, and again, this is from my perspective of financial services, what I'm seeing is a younger generation coming through are demanding more than I think previous generation, demanding more much quicker. And when it comes to, and actually having an incredible influence on things from a much younger age. I mean, you just have to look at GameStop, which was, long story short, GameStop was essentially a blockbuster for video games, call it that. And their stock price was completely at the bottom. Company was just not going anywhere, and a number of people got together on a forum and essentially moved the price up to unbelievable numbers, to the points where companies were having to stop taking more orders. It was essentially market manipulation. But the thing there is just to show the influence that these people have, that the younger generation have, and that's ultimately because of technology. It's because of information. They are wanting more and wanting faster because it's I think compared to previous generation, the accessibility they have to technology, to information, just means that we need to really take the next generation very, very seriously. if we don't, and if companies don't, they will be left behind more so than companies in previous generations. I think this generation is really going to move markets and make changes. And I don't think it's going to be an argument between generations of and there's going to be discussions. I think if they want to do something, they will. And you just see it, how young some of these people are. And you just look at Greta Thunberg, for example. I mean, in previous, if you ever thought about previous generations and of a young girl leading that charge on climate change, you'd never have imagined that. So I think that's one thing I would also for your listeners would say is, do not underestimate the younger generation, because they are going to change things like no other generation has.
What do you think the cause of that is?
I honestly think it's two things. It's technology, the ability to do that, the ability to communicate, the ability to take control, the ability to interact with others. But I also think it's education. It's also having the information available. There are so many forums, digital channels, streaming services, television, social media. It's everywhere. And I think that's the thing. More and more people have information and have the education coupled with that to make decisions and to to have that level of knowledge to make change. And they not only have the individual levels of education and the individual levels of information, but they can come together at a drop of a hat and make change. And I don't think previous generations could do that. I don't think that it could be mobilized that quickly. The speed at which this generation can mobilize and make change, call for change, is astonishing. And I think that's something that's really, really interesting.
It is interesting. Great conversation. Jamie, where's the best place for people to find you?
You can find me on our website, which is www.greentarget.co.uk, and I'm on LinkedIn and I'm on Twitter at BROWJD. Always keen to hear from your listeners, always keen to help any way I can. So very keen to hear from people.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your time today.
Thanks, Thomas. Thanks for having me.